I understand that if I can't impact my own life in a way where I could feel whole and complete as I do this work to the best extent that I can, then there's something delusional about the way you're looking at the world. Welcome to Hello, Kind Soul podcast. I am your host, Dr. Ebony Green, where we uplift your spirit one episode at a time. I hope you're having an amazing day. And today I thought it would be really important for us to just think about like longevity in the roles and careers that we take on. Like, what does that need to look like, feel like, and sound like, right? And so the phrase, don't lose you in it, comes to mind. And when I think about many of the colleagues that I work with, people that I know, what I always sit with is how dedicated they are to changing the world. And in my career, it's been education, right? So for young people and for educators, and so when I think about that, is this idea of like many people are so well-intentioned that we get so rooted in what it is we want to do that there's so many things that we end up forgetting, kind of letting go of, really struggling to pay attention to, right? And so I feel like one of the best examples was a few years ago. I had gotten this job. I was really, really, really excited to get. And the thing that I always think about is to whom much is given, much is required. And in that realm, it was really wanting to demonstrate to the folks who had hired me how dedicated I was, right? And most of us who are in education realize like we work tirelessly to bring to fruition change, higher student outcomes, just all the things that pertains to making sure that our young people have access and option to their highest potential, right? And that particular year, I had a lot of stress happening, and so I wasn't feeling my best. And so, as you start to not maybe feel so good, you think, oh, it's stress, I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I need to eat better, all the things. And I kept going. And this started at the beginning of the year, right? And so for calendar purposes, it's usually around September school starts, and I just wasn't feeling well. And I kept going because it was like, you know what? Like, I want to make sure that I demonstrate that I've made a good decision. They made a good decision. And so I kept going forward. And fast forward to a year later where I was really, really ill, dropped 50 pounds, still believing it's stress, right? And I go to a doctor, and my doctor's like, wow, like most people who, get to here, I see in the emergency room, you're really ill, and there are some things we have to do immediately. And the interesting part was I had gone to the doctor, left the office, went to the doctor, and knew that the next day I had 2 leadership seminars that I had to do for the district that I worked for. And so he was like, listen, we have to have emergency surgery. And I'm like, great, this is fine, not a problem. Can we schedule it for next week? And he looks at me with this really serious face, and he doesn't smile like I am. He looks actually alarmed, and he's like, maybe you didn't hear me the first time. Like, we can do it next week, but you'll actually won't be here. Like, you need to have surgery tomorrow, right? And I remember when they told me that, like, even in that moment, it didn't quite resonate with me that I was actually, maybe going to die if I didn't do it, right? Because in my head, it's like, I still have to go do this thing tomorrow. So I don't have time to take off because now there's this summit that I'm supposed to be a part of. And the reason I share that with you is because for whatever reason, I missed the cue. I missed the obvious. I missed the things that most people would say was common sense, which was you have lost your way. You are prepared to risk your life to do the thing that you say you wanted to do, which is change the world. But the thought itself is really counterintuitive because if you die, right, if you're unwell, if you're in a hospital, if you're mentally unwell, you can't actually do the very thing that you've dedicated your life to do. And so in that moment, to me, was like the shot heard around the world, right? Like you start to realize like, wait, what am I doing? And so obviously, because the doctor was very clear about it, I had the surgery. But what happened after it was really what really helped me change the way I looked at the world, what I was here to do, how I cared for myself, or the truth be told, how I didn't care for myself, right? The same that I wanted to care for others. And so after the surgery, as most of you know, you can't go right back to work. And so I had like these 5 days that I was kind of sitting around and milling over and feeling guilty and worrying, what does this mean to them? What would this mean to me? Will I still have a job? Now, let me be very clear. There was no evidence that I wouldn't have a job, number one. And number two, the people who I'd notified that I was going to go have surgery were very aware, and there was no real comments about it being a problem, right? They were like, do what you have to do. We will take care of the rest. But I share that story with you because there are many, many, many of us battling with the conversations inside our head that are so dangerous because there are things that are competing in our lives, right? The person as an individual and how we live in a space of our everyday space, right? Of living and loving and having family and all those things. And then there's this other person who, again, has this role or title. And the thing that I realized I started to conflate and got wrong is that I was not my title. That I, outside of that, had a right to be healthy and well and balanced and mentally and physically and spiritually well, right? And so what it really what I sat with was like figuring out like, where did you go wrong that somehow you forgot you and it? Like you missed that when people take breaks from roles to go on vacation or take a staycation or just take a step away, it's to reclaim balance. It's to reground themselves. And somehow I had gotten it wrong that the only way for me to do this thing, which is called change or transformation in the world, was to sacrifice my well-being, whether mentally, spiritually, or physically, to achieve the task. And what was even worse is I was demonstrating this to the people around me who I was in charge of, right? I would say things like, I care about you and I want you to be well, right? I need you to engage in some self-care. I need you to take time for you. And then they're watching me never do that thing. And so I remember being a parent, people would say like, your kids hear what you say, but they watch what you do. And what you do has far more weight than what you say. And so as a leader, because I was unable to model for others what balance really looked like, what care really looked like, what putting yourself first, which is necessary to make sure you're able to go do the thing, right? Step your feet in the role, right? Create the change in whether it's a classroom, a boardroom, a school district, whatever. Like people are watching you, folks. And the reason I bring this up is not only is like, most conversations I have with people surrounded around sickness and not feeling well and mentally struggling, but it was like, okay, but what's the pervasive thought process, particularly in America, about how we take, how we have a balance or how we get rest or how we ground ourselves, right? Like if you don't understand two things, one, that your version of change, the transformation you want to create is so connected to the spirit and feeling of calm, of joy, of peace, of rest. Like, there are so many times I've wanted to go do something. It kind of reminds me as a leader, another bad example I think I led for people is like going to work sick, right? And prior to COVID, like I'm sure there's a ton of people who go to work sick for multiple reasons. But more so for me, it was like, because I don't want to not be at work. I want to make sure I'm present. But again, the messaging is what you're teaching other people. It's like neglect yourself and do this thing, not realizing that every time I was really actually sick and went to work, I wasn't very productive, ever. Like I did my best. I stumbled through the day, but for the most part, I was just kind of like this picture of what I was doing, but not really working hard because I wasn't actually feeling well. And so I think a really good place for where I had to start, which I think you need to start, is like, what are the messages that you have internalized that you think you have to perform for other people, right? Like, because that's really what fed the need to be there every single day, even when I wasn't feeling well, right? There was a thought process that I had in my mind that made me believe that like other people were watching me. And if I dared to take a break, to rest, to recuperate, that somehow that was going to expose a piece of me or expose my inability to do my job, right? Which isn't actually real at all. And then there are cases where people work in companies where they make you feel that all the time. And I would say if you work there, like, listen, don't take my advice, but you need to reevaluate where you are. Because, we know for sure that staff outcomes are connected to culture and climate. We know for sure that how people show up, their productivity, their ability to engage in a space and be super productive is absolutely connected to how do I feel in this space, right? And so while there are some thoughts around like, well, you need to be no nonsense with your staff, I would argue that most companies who engage in a way engage in creating an environment that's healing and helpful and supportive and inclusive to their staff probably have higher outcomes. I remember I was watching recently like a podcast, and someone was talking about, how he was able to convince the people he was working for to have unlimited vacation time for their employees. And how when he said that to the people he was working for, they kind of looked at him like, are you nuts? Like, absolutely not. They're going to take advantage. And he was like, listen, if it doesn't work out, I'll pay the difference. And so they went forward with the plan. And when they went back to actually analyze the data, they had a 40% increase in productivity. 40% increase in productivity. But the second piece is even more interesting, is that when they analyzed at the end of the year, the amount of time people took off, it was no more than the last year. And so what that spoke to me was like, because when you treat me as an adult and I feel like you value if I'm good, you value my time off, you value my rest, now I'm committed to doing everything I can to move this initiative forward, to improve the outcomes of this company, to demonstrate the fact that I appreciate that I'm appreciated, right? And so when you're kind of thinking about like, how do you not lose you in it? It's to really kind of sit with your values to say like, what are the ways that I engage in rest and care and joy? Like, what does it look like, right? Because joy is something that you choose. I don't think we necessarily wake up and we're just joyous people running around the world. I think every day I have to make a conscious decision to choose joy, to choose rest, right? And for some people, when you share that, you kind of they give you a face because it's like, well, no, you're all in, you're 10 toes down, you got to do all these things. And you know what? I understand that, right? I don't necessarily agree. I don't think there's a space for it to be if or. I think it's a both and, right? So follow me for a minute. When we think about how much work goes into being a real change agent in this world, we understand the level of, toxicity, right? Because when you're trying to make the best decisions for young people or in other contexts for organizations, whatever, like sometimes if you really want to create change, you have to be innovative. And sometimes when you're innovative, your ideas are different than what other people would see as the norm. And so you might, get pushback when you are like working in the space of social justice or even education, right? All of those things have a heavy weight to carry, right? It's a tax that you walk around with. And so if you want to be able to do this for 20 years, for 25 years, for 30 years, there's no way you can do it without seeking out those pieces, the things I just shared, right? The ability to reground yourself in some sort of calm is so connected to, I can go back in the world and do this thing that requires a lot of work and effort. And so when we think about how we show up in the world, I need you to think, on one hand, the level of change I want to create requires a ton of energy and effort for me. Right. And it might put me in spaces that aren't necessarily healthy for me. And when I say healthy, because it has a lot of stress, right? It may have a lot of things that can impact your health, both mental and physical. And what we know for sure is that illnesses love toxicity. They love stress, right? High blood pressure, high cholesterol, heart disease, cancer, all the things thrive more in bodies it can occupy that have high levels of stress that we don't work on or work through. And so when you think about the average change agent in the world and what they're doing and how much they're exposed to that level of stress, that's when you really start to understand like, oh, wait, there's this space that I need to carve out where I can go reset myself so that I can come back and create the impact I want to create in the world. And for me, I had to really take inventory that was the first time in my life that I ever just hit a wall. Like I couldn't keep saying I'm going to keep going. Like to drop 50 pounds in a year and to your brain, and I'm a fairly intelligent person, not register that something is gravely wrong speaks to almost being delusional about your reality. And I'm sharing this with you because I know there are people watching me right now who are in a similar situation. I know there are people whose family members are sick and you are literally having a conversation as to whether you care about your mom and take care of that or go to work because you don't want people talking about you. And I just want to alleviate the burden that if I have to work anywhere that asks me to question whether I can go take care of my family, whether I can look after my mom or my kids or my partner or whatever, if that has to be the conversation that I'm having with myself, but a real conversation because something in that environment has spoke to me that says, if you take time to go take care of this, we are not going to value you and we're going to relieve you of your duties, I promise you that is a gift and not a curse. Right? Like there gets to this place in your life that you have to realize and recognize that no one is coming. No one's going to come and tell you this is a decision you need to make, that there's a level of commitment that I have to have to myself to stand 10 toes down to say, I am here to make enormous change. And I want my legacy to be all the lives that I impacted. But I understand that if I can't impact my own life in a way where I could feel whole and complete as I do this work to the best extent that I can, then there's something delusional about the way you're looking at the world. And I get it because a lot of that delusion comes from most people showing you that the faster you move, the more you do, that the better you will be successful, right? Because what we do in many places is we conflate this notion of like productive, busy is productive. And so as long as I look busy, then that means that I'm actually having an impact. And the reason I say that is because even in the moments that I was going to work that entire year and doing a bunch of other stuff, I knew I wasn't feeling well. Like I knew how ill I felt and I just kept going. And what happens, and this is why I'm cautioning you, when these things are happening to you, it's a gift. It's an opportunity to you to look at what you are doing. Like, where are you going? Because had I not got to the place where I actually went to the doctor, I wouldn't even be talking to you, right? And from that time to now, the amount of people that I've had the blessing to interact with and share stories with and talk through problems with and cry with, all the stuff would have never happened had I not prioritized my wellness in a moment that I struggled to see the importance of. And so when we're thinking about like, as leaders, particularly in the world, but when I say leader, like that's a very subjective term, right? Because if you're in a classroom educating 30 kids, you're a leader, right? There are so many people out there trying to do the good work, I would say, right? And then you get to these moments where it's like, I don't know if I could do this thing. And the amount of people in every single audience that I speak to, no matter what state, country I go to, there's always a percentage of people who are crying because when we talk about this topic of taking care of yourself, reprioritizing your family in your life, right? The community that really matters, we all have this quiet recognition of what we've sacrificed to get here. How much we've given to do the work we have done. And while that is super important because I know you're well-intentioned people, what I'm saying to you is that there's a space for you to think about who you are in it. There's a space for you to say that my priority is to make sure that I'm caring for myself so that I then can go do all these things. And that's not counter to doing these things, right? Because what I also had to recognize is that one situation wasn't just the situation. That one situation was many different moments over the course of my life that I actually started to recognize I was sacrificing something that I couldn't get back. Whether it was my health, whether it was family, whether it was kids, whether it was friends, whether it was opportunities. Like when the only thing you can see is doing the thing in front of you with no recognition of the consequences of living life with blinders on. There is this moment you're going to hit the wall and then you look back and you get really frustrated because you realize that you got your seat at the table, but you don't recognize yourself at all. And that's when the sadness kind of washes over you because there are so many things that you can now sit in retrospect and think about that you can't change. And so I think for you new leaders going out there in the world, there's a place and a space for you to up in the beginning of your career to start to think about what are the things that are going to be non-negotiable in my life and ways of being that allows me to engage in a level of care that doesn't leave me in a space of survival at the end of the year, but it leaves me in a space of thriving at the end of the year because I very intentionally have made decisions that I know will ultimately leave me in a better place year to year and long-term allow me to continue to do more things in a long, you could do more things over the long term, right? Because when you think about all the times we're sitting around and we have conversations with people, often the message is counter. It's like grind culture. It's a big deal. We're all going to grind it out no matter what. You're going to keep going. And that's the story of people who subjectively think that's a great idea, but haven't hit the wall yet. And I think COVID, randomly enough, is one of those things that taught us that there were other things in our life that mattered other than our jobs. If we were fortunate enough to be in a place where we could go remote or not work as much and still be able to maintain our life in some way, shape, or form, once COVID was over and you had to go back to this rat race, you were like, this is not even a healthy pace. This is dangerous and deadly. And why do we do it? Like, there are other countries right now, for example, Australia, where I was talking to someone and she shared that they actually passed a law, and I think it's in 2021 after COVID, where every single company had to think about the psychosocial hazards in their company because the rate of suicide was escalating. And so they were like, okay, let's do something that really requires each company to focus on the wellness of their employees, right? And that kind of takes me back to this thought of like, not do as I say, but do as I do. Like, when a company comes out and says, you have unlimited vacation time, we care about your wellness. You have, there's a belief system in our company that we want you to take your days off. There are companies that require you to take a certain amount of days off per year, right? That it creates space for me to now say, all right, I'm going to take some days off, right? Because I feel like this is the actual environment that I'm in. This is normalized. Like, they understand that my wellness is connected to my output. And so there's no need for me to feel bad. But even before they create that structure, like, you have to create that mindset. Like, instead of grind culture, I think of work hard, play harder. Like, when I dedicate time and I go on vacation, for many years, I took my laptop, I took my phone, I'd be on the phone, I'd be checking email on the beach. And now it's like, nah, I'm just going to take my phone, and if I want to email something, I'll do it. But I don't feel the urgency to continue to sit and work even in a place of rest, because that, again, is very counterintuitive to reality. Like, what's the purpose then? The environment? Right? And so there are two things that I want you to really think about as we close up this episode. One is like, what's the mindset that you currently have about how much rest you engage in? What does your community look around you? Like, does your community support and encourage and remind you to take time away from the work that you've invested your career in or your life's work? Do you have people who hold you accountable to that? Right? Or do you have people who say the right things of like, this is what you should do, but then give you the side eye when you do? Oh, she's on vacation again, right? Like, what's the community that reminds you of your goals, right? Like, the things that you need to do. And then the third thing is like, when you think about the place you work, whether you're self-employed, entrepreneur, solopreneur, work in a company, whatever you do, is there a culture and climate that supports this notion of like wellness, that there's a balance to what you do and there's a wellness component that you have to engage in to keep your mind and your spirit right at all times? And so when you're able to go out and take time off, there's no level of guilt, right? Nothing said. There's no eyes kind of turns. Like, they're like, good, I'm glad you had a day off. When you have those jobs and you take the day off, do they still call you or email you or text you? Because if they do, then there's a weight of like, I'm taking the time, but I know you still want me to engage. And if that's the case, what are the ways in which you build in the balance, right? And the boundaries to say, I definitely want to get back to you on this. I'll circle back when I'm in the office tomorrow, right? Because there's a level of action that has to be taken in your life to kind of demonstrate to people what your boundaries are. And at first it's really hard. Now I'm like, I always tell people like, no is a full and complete sentence for me. It rolls right off my tongue, right? Because what I realize is if you really, really value me, then you will want me to engage in a level of care that allows me to rejuvenate myself. So that when I do come back to that workspace, I'm excited, I'm fired up, I'm passionate, I'm ready to do the thing, I'm well rested, right? And if I don't, and if I can't, then the bottom line question is like, are you in the right place? And what needs to happen? So mindset, how do you take advantage of that when you have a space that actually allows you to do it? If you don't have a space that allows you to do it, what are the actions that you take to create the boundaries so folks know, here are the non-negotiables for the time I'm going to take away, for the things I'm going to do? And then most importantly, because we can't live our life on perpetual vacation or perpetually away from the actual space, what are the ways in which you seek joy every single day of your life? I hope you're having an amazing week, Console. I will see you next week. Remember to like, share, follow, subscribe to my YouTube channel, all my Instagram, Facebook, all that at eGreen Equity. I'll see you next week. Take care.